The first heavy blow came with the smell of instant coffee and acrylic paint. My hands were trembling above the portfolio I'd spent 4 months assembling, recipes scrawled in careful handwriting, step-by-step sketches and photos of plated dishes I'd made inside a cramped apartment kitchen, armed with exactly one non-stick skillet and too much hope. The studio critique started out as usual, dozens of us crammed into the back room of the art collective, fluorescent lights spotlighting floors I thought I'd hidden. I was the only one who'd brought food. The rest displayed oil paintings and digital collages, ceramics with faces emerging from the clay and abstract installations. My presentation sat on a plastic folding table, a patchwork of food photography and recipe cards, flanked by tiny paper cups filled with parsnip soup. I'd made it fresh the night before, careful to use local produce. I wanted every bowl to taste like the winter markets on Main Street, sweet, rooty, and tinged with caraway and nutmeg. My project is called Rootbound, I began, voice nearly swallowed by the drone of city buses outside. It's a series built around Vancouver's local vegetables and immigrant food traditions. I tried to smile. I want to open people up to lesser-known flavors. You're not actually planning to be a chef, are you? Someone interrupted. There was a smattering of awkward laughter. I saw Amanda, who ran the collective, tilt her head. Not in curiosity, but in caution. She smelled trouble brewing. The comment had come from Matt, who'd taken to borrowing my pencils and then talking loudly about serious art in the lounge. I kept going, but my cheeks flushed. I pointed to a photo of gnarled beets arranged beside lemon-scented honey and described my idea for a fusion borscht, Vietnamese herbs, Russian technique. My voice wobbled, but I held fast until it was time for feedback. That was when the critique twisted. "There's nothing wrong with cooking," said one woman in a paint-splattered hoodie, "but food isn't art, it's just everybody eats. It's like saying a sandwich could get into a gallery." Matt picked up a napkin-sized wedge of the rye loaf I'd baked. "If we critique the food, does that mean we have to eat it?" Maury laughed. "When you said you wanted to be an artist, I didn't think you meant caterer." I shook as I packed up the leftovers, pretending I didn't hear someone mutter, "Maybe she'll open a food truck someday if her parents don't kill her first." They weren't wrong. At dinner that night in the small kitchen on Victoria Drive, my mother turned from her tea kettle and asked, blunt as ever, if I'd found any normal jobs yet. She'd immigrated from Hanoi so I could have Canadian opportunities, she said, her lips pursed tight. All my life she'd taken extra shifts at the bakery to put me through school, and every shred of pride she had lay in my clever brain. Not my hands, which reeked of roasted turnip despite 4 rounds of scrubbing. "I just want to try and cook professionally," I said, voice tenting up with hope. She sighed. "Cooking is work for those who cannot do more. You want to be a cook in some restaurant, sweating over stoves, for what, for who? There is no money, no security. You want to make something of yourself or play with carrots." Her words cut with that sharp, clean force she'd honed slicing my radishes all her life. My father said little, rotating his whiskey glass on the table, gaze elsewhere. My younger brother grinned, not meeting my eye. "Hey, as long as you give me free food someday I'm good," he joked, but I knew the bargain. It was easier to be teased than to disappoint. The next day I cancelled my studio membership. I bounced from temp job to temp job, receptionist, cashier, data entry in an office where no one smiled. But when I got home at night, I cooked. I filled the apartment with smells forbidden in childhood, coriander and fish sauce, baked apples and brown butter. In secret, I honed my knife skills by watching YouTube on mute. I started chronicling my misfit dishes in a battered black notebook: lemongrass chickpea stew, tamarind sesame slaw, dill shrimp pierogies. But outside, cynicism crept in, my grandmother on the phone. "When will you get a real job, Con?" My cousins at weddings. "Remember when you tried to be an artist with food?" The word chef was always delivered with a small mocking twist, like the joke was plastic wrapped and everyone was in on it but me. Still, what else could I do except try? On sleepless nights I bulk prepped for my own sanity, food pounding beneath the fatigue. Chili oil jars, brined radishes, stewed pork shoulder that made my hands burn for hours. Sometimes, after long shifts, I spooned out still warm soup and treated myself with the reverence of a real guest. I ate standing, facing the open window overlooking tightly packed houses, thinking, one day someone will ask for seconds. It took 2 years to scrounge the nerve to apply to culinary school. I borrowed money and took out loans, scraping by on scholarships and leftover banquet rolls. The first time I walked into the downtown kitchen, the smell curled around my heart: yeast, garlic, charred vegetables, citrus. Everyone was nervous, everyone had battle scars, but even there, being the art kid pressed on me. I was older than most classmates, more reserved, less brash. I was slower, afraid of drama or failure. After the incident at the collective, I second-guessed every plating, every word, but the instructors noticed something in my work. At the end of first semester, Chef Arnand pulled me aside. "You come at this sideways," he said, holding up my curry-doused roasted yams. "But you work like hell, keep doing that, don't waste time on the others' opinions. No one pays rent with approvals." So I made my rent with busboy shifts, 12 hours at a time, elbows deep in suds, cramming practice into the margins. I called my mom less. My notebooks multiplied, each new one proof that I could wring sustenance from scraps. I came home only for holidays. My mother peered at the calluses on my hands, said nothing of school, offered me tutoring gigs through church friends. I refused quietly. Each time it felt like a small betrayal, but I clung to the idea that loss and reconstruction weren't the ends of me, just interludes. 3 years in, I finally landed a proper kitchen job. Line cook at an unremarkable fusion bistro in Kitsilano, the sort of place with exposed brick and reclaimed wood tables, closeted away from snobbery but open enough to invention. No one there knew my history. They didn't care that I'd once tried to pass soup as art or suffered through living room lectures about security. We united in the nightly churn: prep, fire, wipe, repeat. I came home stained with broth, proud, exhausted, stacking coins for rent and fresh ginger. Years wound on. I moved up, line cook to associate a sous chef. I patched together workshops and weekend pop-ups in East Van's supply closets. I reconnected with an old school friend, Tania, and she ate my seared mackerel with pickled plums, grinned, and said, "You're wasted not having your own place." The idea began as a whisper and then thundered, unstoppable: my own kitchen. The first time I signed the lease on a threadbare Strathcona space, barely the size of my parents' living room, I nearly cried with a mix of pride and terror. I drained my savings, took more loans, maxed out every favor owed to me. I called it Rootbound after my first disastrous critique. I wanted scents to flood the room: ginger, roasted squash, fish sauce, slow-cooked onions. The name was my middle finger and open hand all in one. Every night I poured my lost years onto each plate. Opening night was modest: old friends, a handful of college classmates, some new neighbors looking for warmth in the dead of a Vancouver February. I trembled almost as much as I had at the studio, but customers closed their eyes and leaned into bowls of soup. Someone left a note on their check: "Thank you, this tasted like home." The place slowly, stubbornly caught on. There were miserable weeks, partially flooded kitchens, a broken AC, bleak days where we nearly went under. Still we grew. Food blogs started popping up, local flavors with global soul. The Georgia Straight ran a brief review, then CBC Radio called asking for a short interview. All of it felt surreal, like I'd broken into a house too nice for a rejected art student. By year 3, Rootbound stood steady. On weekends, the line curled around the block. Our herb salad made the Globe's top 10 dishes. The kitchen hummed with immigrant cooks, our dining room with people as young and hungry as I had been. One spring day, I got a reservation from my mother's church social club. 40 people, they booked the whole restaurant for a Saturday lunch. The day they came, Vancouver glittered, cherry blossoms shredded pink in the gutters, a hard blue sky. In those hours before service, I alternated between panic and hope. I kept revisiting every surface, triple-checking the menu. I wondered what it would be like to have my mother witness it all. Would she spot the family photographs hung near the register, recognize her wedding soup in my first spiced barley risotto? They arrived in a swirl of nylon handbags and laughter. My mother was in the center, lips pressed but not scowling. Her friends cooed and gossiped, eyeing the open kitchen where I stood in my chef's jacket, clutching my prep list. I came out for the start of service. "Welcome," I said, voice carrying over the clatter of serving platters. "It means everything to have you all here." I worried my Vietnamese might sound childlike, but my mother squeezed my hand briefly, fierce. To calm myself, I cooked with all the practiced force I could summon. I worked the pass, shouting, "Table 3, 2 salads, 1 pork, 1 yam, go." My crew assembled bowls with a precision I'd sweated years to build. The kitchen sizzled and the dining room filled with steam and chatter. When the fourth course, the borscht with Vietnamese basil and a braid of rye, went out, I saw my mother's face from behind the counter, mouth rounding in quiet surprise. She lifted a spoon, tasted it, smiled, a shy, clear smile, and said something to her neighbors I couldn't read. For dessert, I sent out lemon rosemary ice cream with ginger raisin shortbread. The laughter slowed, then hushed as people ate. At the end, they rose together and applauded. Most had never dined in a restaurant for a meal made by a community member, much less a daughter. When the last coffee was poured, my mother beckoned me close. She looked at me for a long time, her friends watching silent. "This is yours?" she asked, a trace of doubt flickering. "Yes." I wiped sweat from my brow, heart thundering. "All of it." She took my hands in hers. They were warm, sticky from zest. She shook her head faintly, then leaned in, pressing her cheek to mine as she'd done when I was young. "I was wrong," she murmured, in Vietnamese so quiet I almost missed it. "I didn't see. I worried you would be hungry, but instead you filled so many bowls. You built something I cannot even imagine." The others caught the words, and soon the room rose in a wave. Several women hugged me, tears wet against my shoulder. Even the pricklier men nodded, approving, muttering, "Very good," as though those words were holy. My brother, who'd come last and lingered awkwardly near the door, caught my eye and mouthed, "That was actually amazing." He hugged me, one arm, brief but meant. My father was last to approach. He said little as ever, but pressed a thick envelope into my hand, some small, quiet gesture of support, a nod at the life I'd built with or without them. After service, the quiet blessed me. I sat at a prep table, tip money stuffed in my jacket pocket, the scents of lemongrass and fennel swirling in the air. I thought of all those years lost between rejection and resurrection, studio critiques gone sour, cheap rented apartments, family dinners loaded with disappointment. But now my hands, bruised and steady, could feed not just myself but all the ones I loved, the skeptics and the faithful. Vancouver's dusk pressed against the glass, gold and gentle. The kitchen echoed with the memory of applause, the satisfaction of being seen not as ridiculous but redeemed. I gathered the soiled aprons, cleaned the knives, breathed deep, ready, at last, to begin again.